321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green, right outside Henry County, 911 dispatch.
321 status.
Hello everyone, my name is Yasser Bashir and I'm a commander with the Houston Police Department. I would like to welcome all of you to another episode of Bridges on Aj TV. The mission of the Houston Police Department is to work cooperatively with the community to reduce crime and improve the overall quality of life in our society. What we have done is we have done a very unique a partnership where Houston Police Department and Aj TV have joined together to educate and bring awareness and also talk about issues that affect our community. Now, many of the viewers on Aj TV are from South Asian backgrounds, such as who are from such countries as Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. So what we want to do is we want to bring issues that affect them the most. However, today's topic is very unique, very different. So I would like to give all of you just make a recommendation or suggestion is that viewer discretion is advised because we are going to talk about some things that normally we don't discuss. So today's topic is about human trafficking. And today we're going to share with you a lot of information, a lot of details. So please stay tuned with us and follow us through our whole program because we're going to have a lot of information that you will benefit from. So today I have a very special guest with Houston Police Department, Sergeant John Wall. I consider him an expert subject matter in human trafficking, and he's a very busy person, and I'm very happy he took a time out of his busy schedule to be here with us today. So how are you doing, John?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Well, absolutely. I know you're a busy person to get hold of,
Thank you.
but I think the information that you possess is all the viewers, they need to hear about this because I know that they can benefit from them. Yes. Especially anyone who has a small child, or not small child, but a minor in their family or relative, because many of the victims are minors.
That's true.
So what I want to do is, first of all, let's get you familiar with the viewers. Tell us something about yourself, your background, your expertise in this subject, human trafficking.
Sure. So I've been with the Houston Police Department for 26 years.
Wow.
And I've had the opportunity to work various units and divisions throughout my career. Back in 2014, I had the opportunity to apply for a position within our human trafficking unit. That was a new unit at the time that was initiated from the mayor and the mayor's office along with the police chief. It was a great idea because we didn't have a unit specifically to investigate human trafficking offenses. And that really kind of set the stage for working with all of our federal, local, and state partners along with victim services. And so since that time, I've been focused specifically on those investigations. And that includes domestic and international,
wow,
state and federal investigations, and then working with all of our non-governmental organization victim service liaison partners. In 2016, we had the opportunity to apply for a federal grant to initiate a human trafficking task force.
Oh, wow.
So as you might expect, since we had all of the agencies kind of working together informally, it was just a great way to put together a formal task force with the help of the federal government.
Well, that's great. Now, there's something I just want to mention to the viewers. When you say that we have a unit that investigates human trafficking incidents, to me, since I work in the law enforcement, that means there was a need for you to unite all these resources because this crime is happening way too often. That just a general officer cannot investigate. You need somebody with expertise and more experience and training to be able to investigate these kind of cases.
Yeah, it's a very unique crime in that you're dealing with a victim that doesn't make an outcry. Right. They don't come forward to the police. And so, you're dealing with somebody that's been traumatized very deeply. So you have to have that expertise and training to be able to bridge that gap, that communication barrier. And there's so much more that you have to know to investigate these kind of crimes.
So I think generally we explain what it is that you do, but now let's define
Sure,
what is
sure.
considered human trafficking. Some people even call it the modern day slavery.
Yes.
So let's define what
Yes,
it is, so
yes.
that way our viewers can have a better
Sure,
understanding.
Sure. So let me start out by saying this and kind of take a worldview of human trafficking. The Department of Justice has labeled human trafficking as the third, if not the second, largest criminal enterprise in the world.
Wow.
24 million victims have been estimated worldwide. And this kind of crime is the reason it's so popular. It generates billions of dollars.
Wow.
And the estimates are anywhere between 40 and 150 billion dollars.
Not millions, but billions.
Billions.
Wow.
That's correct.
A staggering number.
And in a recent study that was conducted by University of Texas, highlighting trafficking just in Texas, we found that there's an estimated 313,000 victims. 79,000 of those are estimated to be teenagers, children and teenagers. So it's a very prevalent problem. It's a very egregious problem. And you really have to have the expertise and the resources and able to fight this issue.
Wow. So how does the law define as human trafficking? Just like we have,
Yes,
we have our
yeah.
Texas Penal Code, we have different laws and different
Correct.
elements of
Correct.
that law. So what are some of the elements?
So let's talk a little bit about
Yes,
that.
let's
Yeah.
do that.
So human trafficking is just another, in simple terms, you mentioned modern day slavery.
Yes,
It's simply exploitation of another human being. And when I say exploitation, what commonly we see is, and the textbook version is someone that uses fraud, force, or coercion to receive either forced labor or commercial sex
Forced
for money.
labor, commercial sex.
Correct. Correct. And so it's a process, right? So it's the recruitment, it's the transportation, it's the harboring, and then the actual, all the way to the actual acts of either the forced labor or the commercial
So
sex.
in a nutshell, that human being becomes a product
Yes.
that you can use.
Yeah, so you could think of drug trafficking, one of the biggest criminal enterprises in the world, and the commodity is the drug, and that drug can be sold only one time. But when it comes to a human being,
Right.
that human being can be sold over and over again for sex purposes, but they can also be forced to work long hours, day after day after day, and it's a resource that can be utilized over and over again.
Wow.
A human resource, I should say.
And that's unbelievable that it's happening
It is
right
unbelievable.
behind in our back doors in our neighborhoods, and we're not even aware of it. So I'm glad you're here, and we're gonna talk more about this. So let's talk about something separate, but then we're gonna get more in depth. You talk about exploitation, about involuntary servitude.
Correct.
Where do you commonly see that at?
So we see it across a lot of different kind of venues, especially in a city that's as diverse as Houston. You have the construction industry. I mean, Houston is continually growing, and there's a lot of jobs available for that type of industry. You also have the hospitality industry, the hotels, the restaurants. You also see, even on the street level, door-to-door sales of magazines.
Yes.
These individuals are forced into doing that, and they have to turn all the money over to their, quote, recruiter or captor.
Right.
So we see it in a wide variety of industries, and then obviously the most common ones that you would think would be like the illicit massage parlors and brothels, strip clubs, topless clubs, places like that as well.
So some of the other things I have written down here is that I took some notes was that they also work excessive long hours or unusual hours. There's some of the signs you can look for. Are not allowed to take breaks, or unusual restrictions are placed on these servitudes.
Correct. Correct.
Large debt to pay off. I think you briefly touched upon that.
Yes.
Sometimes they come over from overseas, and that they have to pay a debt. But sometimes even the debt is paid for, they still keep them in that same condition.
Yeah, that's so. There's a lot of when we talk about trafficking, we talk about domestic and international.
Right.
Okay, and so you're mentioning the international side of trafficking, and what we see a lot of times is immigrants will come to the United States because they want a better life, and they'll enter the legal way, or sometimes they'll be smuggled across the border.
Right.
And they're in a country that they don't have any family or friends. There's a language barrier typically. They're desperate to find work. And so these traffickers are well aware of these kind of people, and they get recruited. They make connections with other people thinking that they're going to get a job of their dreams, and it becomes a job. It becomes a nightmare.
Yeah. So what we do at Houston Police Department is that whenever we have new refugees that come into the U.S., especially to the city of Houston, what we do is right away when they first arrive here, especially the Midwest Division, we meet with them. We let them provide them information.
That's great.
How to get a driver license, how to call the police.
Correct.
Because we want them to trust us.
Yes.
Because we don't want somebody else taking advantage of them because they're new. They don't know the system. They don't have any friends. So right away we're there to build that bond because we don't want them to somebody else
to fall prey. Yes.
Or have somebody take advantage of them. So that's something we always do. But that's something I think the viewers should always be mindful of, that there are people being exploited today, and then we have to do something about that. Now let me ask you this question. Now, as law enforcement officers, what are some of the challenges that we are facing when it comes to either identifying human trafficking incidents or investigating it, or having the cases being reported to us?
Yeah. So it is a very challenging crime, probably one of the most unique and challenging crimes that we face as a law enforcement agency. And I touched on this in the very beginning, that human trafficking victims don't raise their hand, or they don't call police and outcry and tell the police what happens or how they got into the situation. And there's a lot of reasons for that. They've been threatened by the trafficker that they'll be hurt, or that they'll hurt the family. They're in constant fear because they're threats of force that they have to deal with, and at some point, depending on the age of the victim and how long they've been trafficked, they even bond with the trafficker. As bad as things are,
wow,
they look at this person as their provider, their savior. Wow. And so it's very difficult for them to separate themselves from that.
I think there's a term, it's called the Stockholm Syndrome.
Stockholm Syndrome,
yes.
That's
where
right.
you fall in love with
Yes.
with the...
So there's some cases where when we go out and we do an undercover operation and rescue a victim of human trafficking, that initial contact, they don't understand that they are actually being trafficked. It's a process that we have to go through to help them understand and help them heal.
All right, that's good. But I know the department is doing a much better job about bringing this issue to our patrol officers, how to identify at the patrol level if somebody's being human trafficked, is being trafficked or not. And I think the officers have done far better job than they have done before. I personally have taken more interest in it.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I have seen you personally doing presentations and bringing this to everybody's attention. Now, I remember earlier you mentioned about the how lucrative this business is, the second most, I guess,
largest criminal enterprise in the world. Yes.
So that means when the criminals, when they choose a profession, like how we choose a profession to be a doctor or a businessman, they also choose the profession they want to engage in. So this business is very lucrative.
Yes.
And that's why I don't think it's going anywhere. So we have to fight it. We have to come up with different strategies. And one way of doing that is by bringing awareness and educating the community.
Certainly.
So right now what we're going to do is we're going to pick on this point, and at this moment we're going to take a quick break. And please don't go away, and we'll see you in a moment.
321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green, right outside Henry County, 911 dispatch.
321 status.
321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green, right outside Henry County, 911 dispatch.
321 status.
Welcome back. We will continue with our topic of human trafficking. So far, we have discussed what it is, we have defined it, and how a person is being used or exploited by someone else. If you missed it, human trafficking is considered a modern-day slavery, and now we're going to talk about more about this topic. Now, there are many stats that we can share with our viewers. Can you share some of the stats that you have, such as who are the victims, why people engaged in this criminal,
Yes,
this crime?
yes, sure. So let me start with let me give you some local statistics regarding our human trafficking task force for the year 2018.
Okay.
Just to kind of give you some kind of idea of the overall success on what we're doing in human trafficking is we recovered just shy of 400 victims.
400 victims.
400,
Wow.
just shy of 4, and that was in 2018, from January 1 to December 31, 2018, here in the Houston
And
area.
those are long drawn investigations, not
Yes,
just something you can
yes,
just
that's
clear
correct.
overnight.
That's correct. I would roughly say about 50% of those victims are 14 to 17 years old.
You said 14 to 17?
14 to 17.
That's almost like high school?
Yeah, I mean early middle school to high school
Wow.
age. Yeah, and if you think about that for a minute, why is that? Well, they're a very vulnerable population. They spend a lot of time on social media, which is where a lot of these girls are recruited. Not only that, the juvenile age range is where you have a lot of kids that are rebelling
Yes.
against mom and dad, right? And they don't want to, follow the rules, and so they typically, sometimes they run away.
Wow.
And statistically, we know that if a teenager runs away, they will be picked up by a trafficker within 24 to 48 hours.
I'm glad you mentioned that. 'Cause just yesterday, I'm sorry, this weekend, we had a similar incident where a 15-year-old ran away from the house, and she hooked up with an older man, and they were engaged in an inappropriate relationship.
Yes.
So one of the biggest problems that I see is when people, especially young girls, when they come from broken homes, and they need that void where
Correct.
they can feel appreciated, and they're going through different changes, and that's what these criminals are waiting for.
Yes.
Which I would call them pimps. They're waiting for that because they need more victims, and they come
For
in
sure.
and they fill that void.
They fill that gap.
And this is what I find fascinating is how do they do it? How do they take a very good person and turn them into this profession and then abuse them?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, the victim doesn't want to leave.
Yeah.
So this is something I want to have that healthy conversation
Yeah,
with you
yeah.
is how does the psychology work where he's able to do that?
It's interesting.
Very interesting, yes.
Right.
That's something I want to
So,
talk about.
at their core, human traffickers, both men and women, because there's women that are traffickers, they're what we refer to as con men or con women. They're very good at what they do. They're very good at picking up on somebody that's vulnerable, whether it be online and having those conversations and being able to see that this is somebody that's basically wanting attention.
Something I don't mean to stop you since you talk about social media. This is what I found out, that these criminals, they actually would type in, they have a software program or app, they actually would type in certain words, depression, sad. They're looking for all those people who are feeling like this, and that's when they start messages.
And they clue on it. Yeah, clue in on that. Yeah,
Clue on
yeah. That is correct. And then you have everything doesn't always occur online. Some of the recruiting happens at the most common places that we, as society, frequent every day, like shopping malls, restaurants, high schools. So, I mean, it's really kind of a wide variety of places where this happens. And again, they're good at seeing weakness in individuals. You know, not making eye contact or things like that they pick up on, and they're very good at singling them out.
You know, a while back I did a episode on domestic violence. So one of the side effects of domestic violence is has a huge impact on the children. And some of the side effects for the children who are actually see family violence at home is that they have low self-esteem.
That's right.
That they have difficulty with with other people, lower grades.
That is correct.
And they get into school. They fight after school. They get into behavior problems. And these criminals, they see that, and right away they are so good in human behavior they can size you up right away. And one thing is the confidence. That's something we should continue to build confidence in our minors, in our youth, because this is the very, like you mentioned, the very vulnerable time when this other person is giving them free gifts, giving them attention, and they're nonstop talking to him. He's planting, sweet words in her ear, making false promises, and they buy into it because they're so vulnerable.
Yes.
But everything's calculated, and they show that they love the person, which in fact they don't love the person.
Right.
But
And something we see too along those lines, I think it's very important to point out, is that the traffickers will sometimes use other individuals, typically females, to recruit for them because they're less suspecting. So, for example, if obviously a 25 or 30-year-old male couldn't go into a high school and just start randomly talking to kids. I mean, it would never happen. But what they can do is have they have a victim that they trust, that's been with them for some time and they trafficked, and they use them as a means of recruitment. So they will have that individual, which is going to be much younger, closer in age to the teenage victim, potential victim, and lure them in by different means. So it could be parties. Hey, we're going to have a party and have a get together, and kind of start planting the seeds and doing the recruiting for the trafficker.
And give you a lot of attention, which we all crave for attention. And also like false promises, giving them free gifts, showing a lot of love and affection, friendship. And that's my favorite thing. Not my favorite thing. One thing I always tell people is be careful who you are friends with.
Yes.
And also, your children should be, you should be, as a parent, you should know who your child is hanging out with.
There's no question about it, and kids don't realize that they don't really know who they're talking to.
Right.
That's on the other side of that computer. They assume because they don't have enough life experience that it is someone that says who they are, and that they're the same age, and that they're they go to a school or a similar school close by. They take all these things for granted, and we know that's typically not the case.
Let me ask you this question: in your experience, in your investigations, who are most of the victims, and which country are they from? Can you give any demographics?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's across all demographics and all ages. Kind of what we touched on, I think, earlier. But there's a certain segment of the population that's more vulnerable. However, anybody can become a victim of human trafficking. Doesn't matter your social class, the demographics, but typically we do see a prevalence in underage, right? Number one, they're easier to manipulate. And I say underage, under the age of 18. They're easier to manipulate and control. And again, they spend a lot of time on social media. However, when you talk about the international side, that's more on the domestic side. When we discuss international trafficking, we talk a lot about different countries of people that come to the United States, and they get caught up into a different type of venue. So with the illicit massage parlors, we see the Asian population, women from China that tend to get caught up in that
When you
environment.
mentioned, besides China, have you seen any of the countries that the victims
We've seen
were from?
yes, we've seen a lot of different countries. Nigeria, we've had domestic servitude, we call nanny case,
Wow.
with a Nigerian lady. We've had women from the Philippines.
Wow.
Quite a few different countries that we've encountered.
Now,
So
are you-
nobody is immune. No.
What about social status? Does education, wealth, does it have any kind of impact?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually had cases of college students, women, you know, in their 20s and 30s that are degreed, that are that you would consider professional, that have fell into the human trafficking trap.
Now, earlier you mentioned about minors. Many of the human
Yes.
trafficking victims are minors, but the recent stats that became aware of was that 70% of those minors actually end up in the sex trade.
Correct.
That means your strip clubs
That's
on the
right.
street selling their bodies. Now, as far as is that true? I mean, how often have you?
It is
seen
true.
that happen?
Yeah,
Okay.
it definitely is true. And you got to, well, what is the reason for that? And then if you think about it, in this commercial sex trade, the younger the girl, the more valued, right, for these consumers. And so that kind of drives the market, so to speak. But also the other thing is that we know that international victims from other countries, what we call international human trafficking, is very prevalent.
When you say prevalent, it's
very
like
prevalent.
happens
Right.
very often.
So-
it's very regular.
Right. So the domestic juvenile population, those are much easier to uncover. Why? Because they're reported as a runaway,
Right.
and they're investigated more frequently. If you see a child out, or give you an example, if a child walks into a hotel with a younger man,
Right.
somebody's going to notice that,
Yes.
right? But on the international side, again, because they fear law enforcement, they've been manipulated, brainwashed, that they'll be deported, things like that. They very rarely make that outcry and notify law enforcement.
Let me ask you this question: what kind of signs can somebody look for to see if yes, this person I suspect
Sure.
could be being abused or used as a human?
So the person themselves, right?
Yes, the
You're talking about
victims. How can somebody identify the victim?
So if you think about this for a second, these are people that don't receive medical care, they don't receive proper nutrition, they're working long hours, 15, 16 hours a day, they're malnourished. So you're going to typically see somebody that's not, that does not have a healthful appearance. You may see signs of abuse, whether it be bruises or marks, or some of the on the domestic side, they'll brand their victims.
Like when you say brand,
Brand like a tattoo.
Okay.
They'll tattoo them with their name or some kind of symbol that represents that trafficker. So it's more of that their appearance. They're not going to want to make eye contact.
Okay.
They won't be in possession of their own identification or documents.
Okay.
They won't know if you ask them, where they are. They won't know exactly where they are. They won't be able to answer
simple questions.
basic questions like that most people would ask.
Okay, that's good to know. As you mentioned, like with 2014 human trafficking incidents, we have been working with our federal partners, identifying it, and also investigating these incidents. But sometimes I hear that a lot of incidents happen in Houston, human trafficking incidents. So let me ask you a question: what makes it so common in Houston?
Yeah.
Or other major cities?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think it's common across the border in a lot of the major cities in the United States. And the reason being, in Houston, we have a very diverse population where people can really kind of fit into their community and go undetected. But, we have quite a few sporting type events
Yes.
that brings prostitution type activities into the city. A lot of times it's not uncommon for traffickers to move the victims around from city to city, and it keeps them off guard. They don't even know where they are. So there's a lot of sporting events, there's venues, there's on the labor, and there's obviously a lot of massage parlors and topless clubs, a lot of events that are conducive to that kind of activity.
Since you were talking about big events, do you remember a recent event or incident that occurred regarding the New England Patriots owner?
Yes, yes.
That's a very that really I think
kind of
brought highlights human trafficking, and the news media, they actually took pictures of the living conditions those victims were living in, and it was not good.
No.
So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take a quick break.
Okay.
And then we'll be back in a minute, and we'll continue on with our topic of human trafficking.
321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green, right outside Henry County, 911 dispatch.
321 status.
321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green, right outside Henry County, 911 dispatch.
321 status.
Welcome back, viewers. Today we are talking about human trafficking. In case you have to miss the first two episodes, we are talking about what human trafficking is, and many of the victims are minors and how they're being exploited by criminals. So now we want to continue on with our discussion of human trafficking. Now here's something I want to talk to you about is the many times we see prostitutes on the street walking back and forth, and we automatically assume that person is willingly out there selling herself for money. So I think that mindset has changed, because now in the U.S. what we're trying to do is get those persons, females and males, to get them out of the professions and get them integrated in our normal society. So what have you seen about the attitude, the mindset of how our perceptions of prostitution is changing?
No, I mean, I very, very much agree with what you're saying. Historically, there has been, in our culture here in the U.S., a glamorization of prostitution with movies like Pretty Woman. I don't know if you remember back. And that was a very popular movie. So it almost makes it seem okay, and that these girls and these victims willingly engage in this type of activity, and it's just not true. And I think we finally have come to a point where we realize that. A matter of fact, statistics show that 95% of all women arrested for prostitution either have been trafficked or currently being trafficked.
You said 95%?
95%.
That's almost like 100% of the people,
yes, that's correct.
The persons who are selling themselves have been human trafficking.
That's right.
Wow.
So I think also when these cases were reported in the past, the news would report the fact that this girl is a prostitute was arrested. So she's actually the victim, right? But now there's been a shift to the other side, realizing that, they're not willingly doing this, and there's somebody behind this. And so it's taken a little time to educate the community, and I think the word's getting out there. I think we've done well as an department, and our news outlets are starting to realize this as well.
I feel like that's happening because I don't think anybody should be out there selling themselves.
No.
To make a living. Now some, yes, there are some who do that, but majority, like you mentioned,
very small,
are actually being forced into that profession. And I remember we were talking about that, and our mindset is that if you're doing it, that means you must be in chains, somebody's forcing you, but actually there's a lot more going on behind the back door that we don't see. For example, there are threats being made against them or their family, and sometimes they're doing it out of fear or other reasons.
Yeah, and just to kind of give you an example of that, I mean, we've had many times where a victim has reached out to some of our victim services partners, and they want help, but it's like, okay, can you tell me where you are? But they refuse. I can't tell you where I am because I know there's going to be consequences to that if the trafficker finds out. So we have to be very diplomatic, and we have to be very patient in trying to work with them and get them to understand that we're going to help them.
Now, the second question I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, quick ones. One is, where are these human trafficking victims most likely to be found? That's one. And what about the Johns? Are we doing anything to catch the people
question,
who are
question.
coming and picking up these prostitutes?
So we find victims in various environments within within Houston. You know, this kind of activity occurs at apartment complexes. It occurs at residents. You never know. It could be your next door neighbor. And then some of the locations that you would think of it happening, like illicit massage parlors, strip clubs, hotels. You know, there's a big commonality with trafficking in hotels because that's typically where the trafficker takes the victim to meet the customer.
Right.
So that's a very common outlet.
Now let's talk about our NGOs, non-government organizations, because I think they are the ones who have a huge impact on getting the victims back to a normal person.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about what are some of the resources we have. What is it we do once we have identified that the person is willing to get out of that situation? Can you walk me through what kind of resources we have?
And I wanted to touch on the second question that you had was about the demand side.
Yes.
So what do we do to go after that element? Because it is a huge element. If you think about it, if the demand wasn't so great, the supply wouldn't be there.
Right.
So we have our vice division does regular undercover stings to arrest the buyers, right? And then we have programs to even try to rehabilitate them so they will stop offending. When it comes to victim services, so we're very fortunate and very blessed here in Houston. We have a wide array of victim service groups that we partner with, and some that we not necessarily formally partner with, but informally can help in a variety of ways. And so they're really kind of we can't do it without them.
Absolutely.
Okay? Yeah. They're our link in many cases in making the victim feel safe and secure and being able to give them services before they'll even want to talk to law enforcement. Without that piece, we couldn't be successful like we are. And then there's so many different types of relief that are that we can utilize, especially for immigrants, for foreign nationals that come over here, and so we have things like continued presence and T visas, that allow them, if they're a victim of this terrible crime, they're allowed to stay in the United States. They're allowed to try to regain their life and start working again and receive services, psychological services, whatever it may be, to help them get back to some kind of normalcy.
So if somebody is a victim, but the immigration status is not up to par.
Correct.
It's not like we stop providing service. We treat them any differently. No. If you're a victim, we're gonna do our best to catch the bad guy and also provide you services that you need.
Right.
Which will include up to some of their domestic human trafficking victims. There are some nonprofit organizations, just like YMCA,
Yes.
Landing, and there's several others. They also help you, I guess, give you the skill set or help you get some skill set so you can go get a job.
That's correct.
Get back on your feet.
That's correct.
And as you mentioned, some of them, this victim is so bruised up for years of trauma, they will take them very long time,
It will.
years of therapy to get back to being a normal person. And I think as a society, we need to support that. We need to help them because this can happen to anybody. Like you mentioned earlier about college students becoming victims, minors, runaways. And this is something we need to make sure that we continuously help these individuals get back to normal.
Yeah, and that's part of the demands of this particular job, is that our investigators also have to function as almost like a social service worker. Yeah. And they have to maintain the relationship during that investigative process. And because the victim typically doesn't understand what's detailed in the investigation and what's going to happen next, and so we have to stay. We have to keep that communication open and.
Now, is there any type of investigation you would like to share with the viewers that you were part of? That it was a success story that you were able to bring somebody out of this.
So we So we have a particular area in town that's known as a track. It's widely known across the U.S. and we've worked very, very hard and diligently to.
Is that the Bissonnet? And
Correct. Correct.
Before you do that, I'm going to tell you a story. When
Okay.
I first came to Houston back what, 30 years ago?
Yes.
That area used to be a booming area. I remember my
Yes.
dad used to take me over there. We used to go eat Pakistani restaurants, eat a lot of food, and go shopping.
Correct.
Go buy our produce and stuff like that. But now, if you look at it, it's completely run down.
Yes.
And as you mentioned,
Yes.
it's known all over the U.S. For prostitution. Please go on.
So, without giving too much of the story because it's somewhat graphic, but so we had a trafficker that would come down on the weekend from another part up in Dallas, and bring his what we call stable. It's several girls that would work for him, and they would put him out on the street, and they had a quota to make, so they had to make a certain amount of money during the course of that weekend.
So quota means like these girls, he would bring them in, and they must make this amount of
Much money
for that
per day, per
Okay.
day, right? And so they would be here for a couple days, and then they would go back home to Dallas, be transported back there, and then they would have to meet with the trafficker and figure out if they met their quota. And so if they didn't meet their quota, then they would be stripped down and beaten with a coat hanger.
Wow.
In front of all the other girls.
Wow.
So you can just kind of imagine the fear and the trauma. And now the motivation is there for those girls that didn't get beaten to go back out that following week, make sure they make their quota because they don't want to.
I think this is a misconception many people may have is, hey, all you have to do is pick up the phone and call the police or call
Yes.
your mom and dad, and then everything will be back to normal.
Yes.
But what they don't understand is that fear that person has over them is just, it blows your mind away.
Yes.
And that's very hard for us as law enforcement
Yes.
officers, is to break that fear. Just to say you want help, and we will get you out of it. But that fear it controls them, and they continue to suffer because of that.
Yes. Yes. There's no question, and that, again, that's one of the biggest challenges that we face in fighting this crime. But we've made a lot of strides, and we've made a lot of progress in, like I say, utilizing our victim services folks and understanding the crime so much better now, the inner workings of the crime, to know how to address the women.
Once in a while, I know I've seen on the news other cities that do that. It's called shaming.
Shaming, yes.
Shaming,
With the
yes.
Johns, yes.
If there's an interesting word I saw in the news is that when these Johns who are out there picking up these prostitutes, if you do get caught, they're gonna put your video or your face on the newspaper
That's right.
the next day.
That's right.
And this is common practice throughout the
Yes.
U.S.
Correct.
And do you think that's an effective tool so that it's working?
I think it is, because I know when we do those type of operations, we get a lot of phone calls at our office.
Okay.
And it's usually a family member, it could be a spouse, and they want answers. They want to know why their loved one or their family member was picked up for this
crime.
terrible activity. So I think it is effective.
That's good. And because I remember when I used to work in a jail,
Yes.
and the worst thing that person wanted was a phone call to his wife that this is the crime he was arrested for. Because it's not just embarrassing for that person, it's also embarrassing for the rest of his family and also friends.
Of course.
But not realizing that plus the victim, okay, that you're involved in this conduct could be human trafficking, and you're just adding to the field.
Yeah. And another thing that's important too is that we understand that these buyers are a cross segment of society. All the way from professional people, degreed people, all the way down to a restaurant worker or a waiter, so it's a cross section.
Wow. So now what I would like to do is I would just like to just narrate or summarize whatever we talked about, and the key points that we touched upon today was human trafficking basically means somebody is being exploited.
Yes.
That could mean for labor or for sex.
Correct.
Long as somebody is using you involuntary, there's different. Involuntary meaning against your will for these two purposes.
Yes.
And the other, I think you mentioned, was that many of the victims are minors.
Yes.
They're either runaways or they were having some difficult family problems, and the criminals, they feed off of that.
Right.
And that's what they're looking for, that weakness, low
Yes.
confidence, and they exploit that.
Correct.
And they come up with this, just like the devil,
Yep.
they come in with false promises. I'm here to help
Yes.
you and show you affection and love.
Yes.
And the vulnerable minors, they believe in that. And they think this is the best person in my
right.
life, and slowly it changes. And where now he wants money, he'll exploit them to sell their bodies or do other horrible things. Now, what I would like to do, John, John, thank you so much for coming in today.
Absolutely.
Now, is there anything from your bottom of your heart? Is there any special message you'd like to convey to the viewers?
I just like to say that you know, our community are kind of the eyes and ears of what's happening out there, and if they see anything suspicious, could be a lot of foot traffic or what they may think be victims of human trafficking, to please call and notify us.
Absolutely.
And there's several venues for that, including the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You don't have to give your name. You can report it anonymously.
Right.
You can call our HPD Vice Division at 713-308-8600, or you can also notify Crime Stoppers. And that is one of the most important things our community can do. And to, you know, by doing shows like this and raising awareness and getting the community involved, that's going to be a big help with the fight
In the
on this
worst case,
issue.
call 911. I just want to
Yes.
conclude by saying thank you, viewers, for listening to today's episode. We had a lot of information about human trafficking, but just keep in mind, my advice will be, if you have a minor or family member between the ages of 14 to 17, be involved with them.
Yes.
Listen to them. Make sure that you maintain your trust with them, because this is a very vulnerable age, and this is what the criminals are out there looking for minors, this specific age ranges. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green right outside Henry County. 911 dispatch.
321 status.